Recording in progress.
So do I.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'll go ahead and call to order this hearing of September 27th, 2024 in the matter of WLD 2024-024, the Lewis River Subdivision. My name is Joe Turner. I'm the city's hearings examiner. I'll start with some brief announcements and a summary of the process that will follow so everyone understands how you can participate in the hearing today. I start by saying I'm not a city employee. I am licensed as an attorney and trained as a planner. I say that so you know you're getting a somewhat independent review of the application before me today. My role as the hearings examiner is to conduct the hearing and make decisions about certain land use matters excuse me, in the city of Woodland. In making those decisions, I am required to apply the city's existing laws. I am not a policymaker. I don't have the authority to vary from or change the laws. If you think that the laws need to be changed, you can work with City Council and Planning Commission to do that. But state law requires that this application be judged based on the laws in effect when the application was filed. As a hearings examiner, I'm to provide an unbiased decision maker, and I believe I am unbiased with regard to this application. I have not had any pre-hearing contact with any of the parties regarding the substance of the application, and I don't have any interest in the subject property or any of the surrounding properties. However, anyone has the right to challenge my impartiality, to argue that I'm biased in one way or another, and you can do that when it's your opportunity to testify. Procedure will follow. I'll start by asking staff to summarize their staff report, copies which are available on the city's website. Then the applicant will have the opportunity to present their proposal and respond to the staff report. And if anybody else wants to say anything about the application in support, in opposition, or with questions or concerns, they may do so. Once everyone's had an initial opportunity to testify, I'll give staff and the applicant alone an opportunity to respond to the testimony that was offered. If those responses include any new evidence, I will give everyone a chance to respond to the new evidence. Otherwise, I'll close the public portion of the hearing and announce what I'm going to do. Generally, I will issue a written decision within about 2 weeks after the close of the public record. I'll send my decision to the city. The city will send it to parties of record, so anybody who testifies orally or in writing before the close of the record will be sure to receive a copy of my decision when it's issued. When you testify, please come on up to the podium here. Our hearings are recorded. That's part of our record in the event of an appeal. Please begin your testimony by stating your name and your full mailing address. Please spell your last name so I get it right. And if you represent someone else, please say so. There is no arbitrary limit to how long you can testify, but your testimony should be relevant to the applicable approval criteria which are set out in the staff report. Also, please don't repeat testimony offered by yourself or earlier witnesses. Repeating your testimony doesn't make your case any stronger. This isn't a popularity contest. Whether everybody loves it or everybody hates it is not an issue I get to consider. And if anybody has any exhibits you want me to consider, such as a copy of your testimony or other documents or physical evidence, you can hand it to me when you testify. It is important that all parties make their best case to me. My decisions are final for purposes of the city, but may be appealed to Superior Court. However, the court generally will not allow new testimony and evidence on appeal. They'll decide any appeal based on the record before me. So if you feel it's important that myself or any future decision maker know something about this application, you need to make sure it gets into the record before me. In order to preserve your right to appeal, you or someone expressly representing you must testify orally or in writing before the close of the record. And in order to raise an issue on appeal, someone must have raised that issue before me with enough specificity that people can understand what the issue is. If you feel you need more time to prepare, you can ask me to hold the record open or continue the hearing. If I hold the record open, you'll have an opportunity to submit additional written testimony and evidence before I make a decision. If I continue the hearing, we can come back and do this again at a later date. But if anybody wants me to hold the record open or continue the hearing, you must make that request before the close of the hearing today and provide some support for why whatever you want to submit or continue, why that information couldn't be submitted at the hearing today. But that concludes my introduction. Ms. Garcia, Depot, board.
I'm Maylene Garcia DeBoard. I'm the Associate Planner for the City of Woodland, and I will be going over the proposal and staff recommendation for the Lewis River Subdivision project. So the proposal is to turn 3 existing lots into 85 lots for single-family homes. With that, there are going to be some new streets, utilities for all of the homes. They will also have driveways and things like covered porches. There's a 4th lot where a public access path is proposed down to the shoreline. This is an aerial view of the site. So those top 3 parcels that the arrow is pointing to are where the single-family homes are proposed. There are 6 parcels in total, and it's at 1920 Lewis River Road, and it's zoned high-density residential. So just for some context, this site was previously approved for apartments, which is allowed in the zone, as well as single-family units. And while that permit was approved separately from this one, it also included some clearing and grading work. So if you drive by the site today, you'll notice there's a lot of movement of dirt and things like that, but it's separate from this proposal and not being reviewed today. So like I said, single-family residences are a permitted use in the high-density residential zone. On the right is an overview of the city and the zoning, so that red circle is pointing towards where the site is. This is one of their site plans, so you can see the 85 lots and the roads or the streets there, and then that long path down to the river. This is another copy of the site plan. Those squares in the middle of each lot represent the building footprints, and then within the jurisdiction of the shoreline itself, you can see where the actual homes and driveways and porches are proposed. That's the site right there across the street. So you can see there's that mound of dirt over on the right-hand side. It's a pretty big site. So the approval authority, the subdivision, and the substantial development permit are both being reviewed today. It's also in the floodplain, so the subdivision was reviewed for Title 14 criteria for floodplain development. But we're here before you today because the hearing examiner has authority on both subdivisions and substantial development permits for the shoreline. This has a lot going on. I tried to make it as clear as I could. But it's to show you 2 key pieces of a shoreline permit. So in the shoreline jurisdiction, there's a buffer, and after that buffer is a setback. The applicants propose buffer averaging to reduce part of the buffer on one side of the site and expand it on the right in the yellow. So that yellow is pointing towards the buffer that is added. The original buffer line is that pinkish purple one in the middle. It's also hashed, so that's where the buffer typically would end. But applicants propose moving it back to that blue line, so that's about 20 feet. And then as the buffer moves, the setback does as well. So that green line is where the setback would have been, but now the setback will end right at the end of the floodway. And this was necessary to accommodate their retaining wall that's going in right at the end of all of the lots. And then in the bottom right, just kind of giving you a perspective of where we're looking at. Oh, and I guess one other thing I'll touch on too is that there's a shoreline access path that's it's both proposed and required. The SMP requires that when you're doing development like this, that you have access for the public down to the river, and that shoreline access path is proposed to be wood chips, which makes it both, it makes it pervious, but it also makes it ADA compliant. And our shoreline master program, you'll hear me refer it to as SMP, it allows for shoreline access paths within the buffer without a shoreline variance or anything like that. Also, that outfall is specifically allowed in the buffer without any additional permits like a shoreline variance. So here's some more criteria for an SDP, or substantial development permit. The SMP has its own use criteria, so single-family residences are permitted. Another requirement is that the application have no net lost ecological function. One of the application materials that the applicants submitted was a critical area report with a mitigation plan that outlines how they're accommodating for any loss to ecological functions to make sure that in the end there is no net loss to that. They're also in the channel migration zone, so that means that there's a lot we could go into there, but the Lewis River has a designated area where it could migrate to, and the applicants are within that area, and typically something like this wouldn't be allowed in the channel migration zone, so they had a geotech prepare a report to show that Woodlands SMP is very conservative in our channel migration zone limits, and that it in fact can be reduced and the site isn't within that channel migration zone. Another criteria was that the applicants had to have a geotech prove that in the future shoreline stabilization won't be needed, so they're not going to build 85 homes and then come back and say we need a bulkhead to protect these. So they're far enough away from the river that that's not a concern. Another criteria for shoreline substantial development permits is that overall they also comply with general zoning code. So that's things like setbacks and use, and like I said, single family residences are allowed. The setbacks are on the screen, so front yard 10 feet, rear 10 feet, and side 5 feet or 10 feet depending on if they're next to another lot or they're next to a street. And all of their lots have building envelopes that are plenty big enough to accommodate homes without being in the setback. Now I'll move on to some criteria specific to subdivisions. So in this zone, the maximum density is 35 dwelling units per acre. The applicants propose about 10.5 dwelling units per acre, so that's well under that, which is perfectly okay because this is a maximum requirement, not a minimum requirement. There's a height limit of 35 feet, so all the homes will be less than that. As far as the lots go, there's an interesting conflicting requirement in our code. It says it's broken up into two sections, so it talks about the high density residential zone in general, and then there's a section for single family residences and townhomes in the high density residential zone, and it stipulates that that second section supersedes everything from the start. So while the first section requires 30 feet of frontage, that second section says you can have a lot that's 24 feet wide, and if you have a lot that's 24 feet wide, it's not going to have 30 feet of frontage. And all of the lots they're well over 24 feet wide. There are just 4 of them that don't have the 30 feet of frontage, but it's really not necessary. They also all meet the depth requirement of 80 feet. Like I said, the subdivision itself was reviewed for compliance with Title 14, which is our flood development permit criteria. So 2 big standards there are that they're minimizing flood damage and providing adequate drainage. And I think the applicants so originally they proposed that outfall, and I think there's going to be some changes that they'll speak to after my presentation. But as far as minimizing the flood damage goes, they're raising the lots out of the floodplain. So in finding 8, it talks about that, and I think there's some discussion that it might not be, they're doing a lot of grading work to get those lots up, so it might not be the case that every single lot is 100% 1 foot above base flood elevation, but all of the building sites themselves will be. So that means all of the living space, it's going to be outside of the flood zone, and flood damage won't be a concern. So now we'll move into public comment. We had citizen comment that talked about the fact that there is 35 dwelling units per acre allowed in the zone. It is designated as high density residential, and so it was pointed out that this isn't necessarily the best use of that density. And while that might be true, It does still meet the standards, so it can be approved because single-family residences are allowed. There was also some public comment about the fill and concerns with that, but like I said, that clearing and grading work was approved under a different permit, and so it's not something that we can be reviewing at this time. And then trees were obviously removed with that fill and grade as well. But the applicants and their mitigation report have taken all that into consideration. Traffic and construction. So work is limited to weekdays. And with the traffic issue, they are only allowed the one access onto Lewis River Road. So if you look at their site plan, you'll notice that all of the lots adjacent to Lewis River Road are oriented inwards towards those local streets. So we're not going to have a bunch of driveway access onto the road, and all of the homes will be paying traffic impact fees. We also had some comments from ecology. So there's a list on the screen of some issues that were brought up. There was some confusion initially about the applicants proposing an infiltration pond. I think that term was used in one of the reports, but they've clarified that it's not a pond, it's an infiltration area. And like I said, I think they're going to speak more about that after my presentation. As far as mitigation goes, the applicants did submit critical area report with a mitigation plan to address ecology's concerns about the RHA, also known as the riparian habitat area, and I call it a buffer. The permit has also been conditioned with following best management practices for solid waste management and erosion control. And then the Cowlitz Indian tribe provided language recommending the city condition the permit with an inadvertent discovery plan, which we did do. So given that the proposal meets Woodland Code, both Title 17 and 16 and 14, as well as the SMP, which I guess is also Title 15, staff recommends that the proposal is approved with conditions. One of those conditions will be that the applicants may or may not have to get individual base flood elevation certificates for each home. It kind of depends on whether they go the route of doing a LOMAR or reviewing each lot individually. And like I said, construction will be limited to 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and not allowed on weekends.
On weekends, or it says Sundays?
I believe it's
Sundays.
oh, it's Sundays.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay. And then, yeah, providing documentation of complying with ecology permit. I'm
The general stormwater permit.
okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's in the engineering findings.
And what is a LOMAR? I recognize the acronym.
It's a letter of map revision.
Okay, to adjust the
Yeah, for
floodplain.
FEMA.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thanks.
And that concludes my presentation.
Okay. I have a few clarification questions about the staff report, but first I see we have 3 people online. I'm assuming they're allowed to testify online. It looks like, is this Zoom or is this something else?
It's Zoom.
Okay, so there is a raise your hand feature. Okay. For those people who are online and wish to testify, when I call for testimony, you can indicate your desire to do so by clicking on the raise your hand button. Little hand icon will appear next to your name. When I call your name, you can unmute yourself, state your name and mailing address like everybody else, give me your testimony. When you're done speaking, please mute yourself again so we don't get any feedback issues or background noise. And please also click on the raise your hand button so we know you've had the opportunity to testify. Can I get a copy of your PowerPoint? Just email it to me. The computer one is much easier to see than the printout. But not a rush on that. We can do after the hearing. We can do that. Then I had some questions about the staff report starting on page 9. These are mostly clarifications. And middle of the page, setbacks, SMP 7.1. It says the site has a 10-foot setback measured from the end of the buffer. Is that the shoreline buffer?
Yes.
Okay. Page 10. Under finding 33, and it says the subject lots are within the floodplain and floodway. I thought the lots were outside the floodway.
So the subject lots, that includes that one to the south with the shoreline path.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
all of the homes are outside the floodway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. The open space essentially. That same finding goes on to say that water-dependent uses can be developed on that lot to the south that we were just talking about, but there's no access to it, is there? Is that parcel to the east with the little roads on it, is that part of the site too? So they could access it through that? Do they need to provide access to allow for water-dependent
Yeah,
uses?
so when I say, well, when the staff report says water-dependent uses, the SMP includes, like, the shoreline access path itself
Okay.
is a water-dependent use because it's
Okay.
meant to provide people access.
Okay.
And I'd also like to add,
Mr. Goddard, can you state your name?
sorry, my name is Travis Goddard, Community Development Director for the City of Woodland. The parcel that is kind of the bump out within the open space lot,
Yeah, that's the city's.
that is actually owned by the city. It's a open space park property. And there is a public access easement to that property. So in addition to the path, there is a separate access to that site through the property that's subject to this application.
Okay. Page 12, looks like. Finding 41 says the project will impact the outer area of the buffer. Again, is that the shoreline buffer?
Yes.
Okay. And is those impacts, are they related to the buffer averaging you're talking about, or the grading that they're doing?
Yeah, so I think what I'm referencing, what staff's referencing there is that that buffer, original buffer, is impacted, but the mitigation plan proposes averaging, which then offsets
Okay,
the impact.
that makes sense. Page 14. The second full paragraph there says, as part of the development, the applicants propose a wall surrounding the neighborhood. Is it just on the south?
Oh,
Okay.
thank you. I think the applicants can speak more to that, but there's two, I think there's an east and a west retaining wall.
Okay. And last one was page 15. Finding 54 says water-dependent uses like sewer outfalls. I assume that's storm sewer.
Yes.
Okay. When I see sewer, I just assume it's the other one. Okay, those are the only questions I had. Thank you. Is the applicant, Mr. Marash, are you?
Jason's gonna do
Yep.
the presentation.
Thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Jason Taylor with PLS Engineering. I'm representing the applicant. We also have the applicant, a biologist, Andrea from Ashiko, and Steve Marash from Landerholm, who can provide testimony if needed. First, I'd like to thank city staff for their work on this project and their staff report. You know, most everything we are okay with. There is one slight modification that we would request to condition number 10 on page 26. As was previously discussed, we do have two options to either do the letter of map revision with FEMA or provide elevation certificates for each of the lots that are shown within existing floodplain. The only change we would like to this condition is at the very end, so 10A, to put if required. For a majority of the lots, if a letter of map revision is approved by FEMA, then we don't believe that an elevation certificate would be required for those lots that are completely removed from the floodplain. There still may be lots that have a small portion within floodplain even after the letter of map revision, and those ones would likely still need the elevation certificate.
Okay.
I believe the city did a great job explaining the project. I don't need to go into any more detail. I do think it is worth discussing the changes to this site as compared to the project that was approved previously, the 252 unit apartment complex. In general, the development area has remained substantially similar. The approach with stormwater and access is similar as well. The proposal to remove soil from the southern portion of the site to fill the northern portion of the site to make it feasible to develop. That approach is the same, and that work, as was discussed previously, is ongoing and is occurring right now under the original permit. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to get an alternative option for development of the site. The previous plan had quite a bit of public comment and involvement, and in response to that, we are proposing a less dense development that will have less of an impact on the community with respect to traffic. This new subdivision, or the subdivision plan, is currently the preferred alternate, but before getting approval of this, the applicant decided to move forward with earthwork activities that would work with either site plan. Mm-hmm. If this site plan is not approved, then they would still have the opportunity to move forward under the original apartment approval. There is a portion of the site that was proposed to be developed previously and is not being proposed currently, namely the section of land in the northwest corner and the northeast corner. Those areas were excluded due to some existing easement constraints. Most notable is the gas easement and that crosses the north, or it's just to the east of the proposed site, but it previously crossed the northeast corner of the site. Coordination with Williams Pipe, I don't think went very well, and the ability to develop that portion of the site was not deemed to be feasible. So that was one of the major changes from the previous site plan to the current site plan. One thing that we are looking at is modifying the stormwater system. What we are showing now is feasible, and what we currently have is we have the soils do infiltrate moderately, and the proposed outfall will allow stormwater to disperse in what will be native vegetation and infiltrate into the ground. Now, what is proposed on the grading plan looks like a pond, but it's not necessary to function as a pond, and with infiltration, we wouldn't expect any water to actually fill that pond except under flood events. Nor is the entire area needed for infiltration. The area of that pond is similar to the area of the development, and certainly the size, the area needed to infiltrate is much smaller. So that, as a point of clarification, it's not a pond, and it's not needed for, the entirety of it is not needed for stormwater management. The area is used for dispersion of stormwater that then infiltrates. The applicant is also on the side pursuing an alternate option to deal with stormwater. There is an existing stormwater easement and a large stormwater pipe that goes through the western portion of the parcel and discharges directly into the Lewis River. The Lewis River is an exempt water body for flow control. So after treating stormwater, the applicant possibly would have the option to directly discharge into that pipe with stormwater going directly to the Lewis River. But either way, in the current form or the alternate stormwater plan, the site is, we believe we've shown that the development of this parcel is feasible given the significant constraints.
And there's no changes necessary to the conditions to allow for that other option?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
We should be able to resolve those during final engineering. I think that's most of what I wanted to say. I think another point of clarification would be between the shoreline, the discussion at the end about the staff report regarding the shoreline management area and the buffers associated with it. There's a shoreline management area, and there's also a riparian management area, riparian habitat area, and the buffer, I believe, is the riparian management area, the riparian habitat area. So the 10-foot setback.
Oh, okay.
The 10-foot setback is from the riparian habitat area. The shoreline, as interpreted by the city, extends 200 feet beyond the riparian habitat area, which is also the floodway boundary.
That's what I thought. So the riparian habitat boundary is coincide with the floodplain, or floodway?
Floodway, yes. So the 10-foot setback is from the riparian habitat and not a setback from the edge of the site that's subject to the shoreline jurisdiction. So there are, yeah, it's fairly confusing. There's a lot of buffers and setbacks associated with this, but we believe, we've coordinated with the city, and we believe that we've shown compliance with the shoreline plan, and also show no net loss in habitat function throughout the site. Thank you.
Given what you just mentioned, I want to make sure of that's why I was asking about the buffer, which buffer we're talking about. So on page 9 of the staff report, it says a 10-foot setback measured landward from the end of the buffer. Should that be the riparian buffer rather than shoreline?
Yes,
Okay.
because we are showing development within the shoreline, but it's the portion that's outside of the riparian areas, as modified by buffer averaging.
And I'm assuming page 12 as well, the project will impact the outer area of the buffer, the riparian.
That's correct.
I think that was the only references to buffer I was questioning, but I want to make sure. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anybody else? Oh, Ms.
Yeah,
Morash.
after hearing Mr. Taylor, I want to clarify just a couple points he made. For the record, Steve Morash with Landerholm on behalf of the applicant. Address is 805 Broadway, Vancouver, Washington 98660. And first, I wanted to thank staff. They did a very, very thorough job on the staff report. And as the examiner may recall, we had a hearing on the apartment project. It was very contentious. I had to talk a long time about a lot of issues, but there's really nothing in the staff report that that I have to talk about now because it's so thorough. And part of the part of what we're trying to do is address all the neighbors that we're concerned about parking spilling on the other side of the highway into their neighborhood, and this project is going to obviously have a lot less of an impact on something like that than 3 times as many units with apartments. There's a comment in the record about, Woodland needs more apartments and not, single family. Technically, that's not relevant because both are permitted outright uses. But I just wanted to address that also because, this project, the lots are small. There was a comment in the staff report about the 24-foot width versus the 30-foot street frontage, and part of that was we went to city council with a proposed text amendment to the zone to narrow the lots up to 24 feet. So that was a specific amendment that council adopted at the request of this applicant. It applies, citywide, but it was driven by this particular project so that the builder can have more affordable homes that really hit that missing middle. And so although this has less density than the apartments, it provides opportunities for home ownership at a reasonable cost with relatively small lots and smaller houses that might be more for entry level or kind of hitting that median missing middle area of the market. And so I think that's an important point, although legally probably not relevant because it's an allowed use. The two things I wanted to clarify from Mr. Taylor, he was talking about the Williams pipeline easement and development on the other side, maybe not feasible. I think that was in reference to this particular single family project. I wanted to make sure that there was just nothing in the record that could be used to say, well, that means our apartment project isn't feasible, or the part of it on the other side of Williams. There's issues with Williams, and obviously nobody wants to, go to court with a ginormous, company like Williams. But I think it's premature to say that it's infeasible. I think I would probably say it would be difficult because of potential disputes with Williams. But I have reviewed the easement. I think we've got some pretty good arguments under the easement. So just in case we ever get into court with Williams, I want the record in this proceeding to be very clear that we're not saying that there's something infeasible about developing over there. It's just difficult because we have to deal with the proverbial 800-pound gorilla with this pipeline. They own pipelines all across the U.S. And so I wanted to clarify that for the record. And then on the shoreline, there's a difference between a shoreline jurisdiction and a shoreline buffer. The Shoreline Management Act, has a kind of complex definition of shoreline jurisdiction. But within the SMP, there are provisions for a buffer, and I believe the buffer is measured based on riparian habitat, although technically the critical area ordinance, that applies outside the shoreline. Inside the shoreline, you apply the shoreline management ordinance, but then that incorporates its own critical area provisions, so technically it's a riparian habitat / shoreline buffer, but it's not the same as the shoreline jurisdiction, which is much broader than the buffer. And so I just wanted to clarify that a little bit, that we're talking about the difference between shoreline jurisdiction and shoreline buffer. And unless there's any questions, that's really all I had, and I'll be available after the public has a chance to comment if I need to come back up and respond to something.
Okay, just the buffer issue, riparian buffers, if we change that findings to riparian.
I think that would be the most clear, yes.
Okay.
But I just wanted to distinguish that from shoreline jurisdiction.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
M-O-R-A-S-C-H.
Is there anybody else in the room who'd like to testify about this application? Yes, sir.
My name is John Kenwisher, Kenwisher. I live at 221 Misty Drive, just off of Lewis River Road. The only question I had was, you were talking about the area at the east side between the Williams Pipeline easement and the church.
That little pipe-shaped parcel?
Yeah. What is going to happen to that?
I don't know. We'll ask the applicant.
That's my only question.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anybody else in the room want to say anything? Anybody online want to say anything? Please raise your hand. Click on the raise your hand button if you do. And pause and give anyone a chance to find that button. I've got two of the three. Mary Hall is not on video, but everybody else is. So if you want to say something, just raise your hand physically too if you're unable to find the button. Yes, sir. Terry Hall. You'll need to unmute your. It looks like you are. Go ahead, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, my only question had to do
Can
with.
I get your name and address, Mr. Hall?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Terry Hall, Hall, and the address is 327 Lolo Trail in Woodland. And my question has to do with the pond that isn't a pond. I'm wondering. I'm not clear on what the direction is there. What is there going to be? New grading and seeding of that area? I'm just not real clear on how that's going to be developed.
I'm going to ask staff if they can. Are you able to see the staff's PowerPoint that they're showing on the screen here?
No, the Zoom doesn't allow that. So.
Okay. Have you seen the applicant's grading plans?
No, I've just seen the whole.
Okay, because it is available through the city. I will try and do my best to summarize. The applicant could correct me to the extent I'm wrong. But the area, the northern part's where they're proposing the homes. Then there's going to be a retaining wall on the south boundary there. And then they're excavating much of the southern portion of the site in order to create enough fill to put in the north to raise up those lots, creating basically a bowl on the southern portion of this site. And then there'll be a raised area in the middle for upland habitat, all of which will be replanted. So that big bowl is essentially where the stormwater is going to go. There's, as I understand it, there's a rock outfall area, so the pipe ends at a pile of rocks so that the water doesn't erode as it's coming out of the pipe, or it doesn't erode the ground. And then it just disperses onto the ground in that very large bowl at in the southern the southern portion of the site. The grading doesn't go onto the city's property. So that's essentially what they're proposing to do. So the stormwater is going to flow out and sink into the ground pretty much as it does now, but on a smaller area. That makes sense?
I understand that. My concern would be if we just have stagnant water down there, we're going to have a huge mosquito problem.
Yeah, it shouldn't be it could, again, I'll let the applicant correct me, but it's only during the immediately after storms, the water is going to come out relatively, I assume, a relatively shallow puddle, and then it'll soak into the ground. And mostly during the winter, when the mosquitoes are less of a problem, those are more of an issue in the summer when there will be less rainfall and therefore less water, and also drier soil, so it'll soak in faster. That's my understanding, but I'll let the applicant correct me. And
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
thank you, sir. Anybody else want to say anything? Mr. Hall, your wife is on, I assume is Mary Hall is online, but she doesn't have any video. Does she want to say anything? Do you know? I'm assuming that was a no. You're muted right now, Mr. Hall. There we go.
It looks like she's not wanting to respond.
Okay, just wanted to check, since we're having issues finding the, I don't see it on mine either, but it's a different platform. Anyway, nobody else in the audience wants to say anything further from the city? Nope, okay. And if the applicant wants to address the testimony and correct what I just said, to the extent I'm wrong.
This is Jason Taylor with PLS Engineering again, representing the applicant. I believe there's one question that we didn't answer before about, the extent of the walls. So I just remembered that. Wanted to clarify that. There is a wall along the east property line. It does turn the corner along the south. It does end. It's not fully continuous along the south property line. It ends at some point and then picks up again near the southwest corner of development. It does extend up the west property line a little bit, but not all the way. There is, there is slope around the entire property on the west, south, and east side. So it's a combination of slope and wall along the entire boundary. Because we're filling up.
Yeah, okay.
There were some areas where we couldn't fill as much, and that's where we incorporated a wall in addition to some of that slope.
That's what I understood, but when it said surround, I thought on the north too, and that didn't make sense.
Yeah, so just on those three sides.
When you say on the east, I understand it's going up the west side somewhat. Is it going all the way up the east side?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's right up against the
Yeah, that makes sense.
Williams
I just wanted to
pipeline.
make sure I understood.
Regarding development of the northeast corner, the applicant doesn't have a plan. It's still zoned high density residential, and there's a few options, but our focus has been, like, over the last year, the focus has been permitting and making the subdivision plan work. And so once that is constructed, they'll explore their options on what can be done with that land, but nothing's planned at this time.
I assume, given the testimony of the apartment development, that access would be an issue onto Lewis River Road from that parcel, unless you can get an agreement with the church. That's my assumption, but
Yeah.
again, it's not relevant. You have no plan. That's what answers that question.
I'm not sure what the condition would be for that. There's an existing road across the street that's at the shared property line.
Right.
So Yeah, maybe there is
My
some.
recollection was there were some issues, but it's not relevant.
Those are issues for a future date, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're focused on permitting what we have shown here today.
Okay.
And regarding I guess the dig out area on the south end of the site, your explanation is correct. You know, we don't expect that to be filling with water, because the expectation is that there will be the stormwater will be infiltrating there. Obviously, in high storm events, it may, you know, some stormwater may build up, but the expectation is that will infiltrate. And the idea is also to so our mitigation plan includes plants across that entire area. So it's not an area that we would want to flood, because then those mitigation plans might not survive. So the plan is to use it for mitigation and as part of our no net loss
Mm-hmm.
habitat function.
And just for the public, if you did flood it, the plants died, you'd have to replace them, and so strong incentive not to.
There would be a maintenance requirement, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
sir. With that, I'm going to close the hearing, and based on the findings in the staff report as amended slightly today, I'm going to approve the application does comply with the applicable approval criteria, so I will approve it subject to the conditions in the staff report. I forgot to ask, I'm going to reopen the record real quick. The city's okay with that amendment to the one condition 10A?
10A, yes.
Okay. That'll reclose the record. I will approve it subject to the conditions in the staff report with that amendment. I'll issue my decision within about 2 weeks. I'll send it to the city. The city will send it to parties of record. So anybody who's testified will receive a copy of my decision. If anybody wants a copy and didn't testify, you can ask staff to add you to the list. But that concludes our hearing. Thank you all.